Welcome, everyone. Everyone have a good lunch? Fresh back? All right. So we've got Stephanie Vaughn up here next. We're doing the Mind the Gap, Closing the Digital Divide in America. And I, for one, am very excited to see this talk because I just saw her in Detroit for Self-Conf, which I highly recommend checking out as well. And she talked a bit about bias in AI. So those videos should be out soon. You should check that too. So you're in for a treat. This is someone who's going to speak about what we need to talk about in technology and the importance of seeing all the differences that we're not quite accounting for in general. So presenting, Stephanie Vaughn.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. My name is Stephanie Vaughn, and if you are here for Mind the Gap, Closing the Digital Divide in America, you are in the right place. And I'm going to go ahead and get started. A little bit about me. I'm a Detroit native. I am a communications professional. I have over a decade of experience working in the media side of communications. And in 2016, I made the career change to tech. So I did a boot camp at Grand Circus in Detroit, and I studied front-end web development. I also have done a fellowship in software development. I'm also very passionate about tech literacy and computer science education. And this past summer, I was working as a computer science instructor for a summer STEM honors program in Detroit. So feel free to take a cue from the national treasure of the Parks and Recreation universe, Donna Meagle. And this is my info. You can tag me in your tweets. You can also take pictures. I dressed nice today, so you all can take pictures of me. And can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay, great. And so that's my Twitter, and that's the Abstractions hashtag, and I also made up a hashtag. So let's see if we can get it trending. And if you would like to view the slides, you can follow along. That is my not-so-shortened link. bit.ly, Mind the Gap, Abstractions. And I did not tweet it, but I will tweet it later. So let's take a step back in time to 1996, when America Online left behind their pay-per-hour system for a flat $19.95 monthly fee for dial-up internet. Who remembers dial-up internet? Good times, right? So the modern internet era has been ushered in. And you all may remember the CDs that would be everywhere, especially if you lived in a dorm. They would just dump them in the lobby, and then people would just use them as Frisbees and do all kinds of other unsavory things with them. So this is going to require a little bit of participation from you all. There's going to be a code that pops up. So you can go to pollev.com/StephanieVAU160, or you can text StephanieVAU160 to 222-333 to respond to this poll. And then the answers will pop up on the screen. So we'll take a couple of minutes to do that. I hope this works. Oh, yes. Okay, so it looks like a lot of us, AOL was our gateway to getting online. For the majority of us, it looks like. So that's not really surprising. I just thought it would be interesting to take a poll, since AOL is kind of credited with, bringing the internet to like mainstream audiences. Not saying that it wasn't available before, but it's when it became like widespread and widely available. So this one's going to be a little different. It's going to be a word cloud. So when you respond, how how did having access to the internet for the first time change your life? So just take a minute to think about what changed for you once you had access to the internet, like full time, or just having access to the internet, period. Hamster dance videos. MySpace. Yeah, that was a big one. Unsavory possibilities. I like that. Okay, so it looks like the biggest words are like kind of the most common responses, which are access, email, MySpace, AIM, information. So it's safe to say that having access to the internet opened things up for us in terms of having access to information, at times access to entertainment, and just broadening the world that we knew. All right, so we're coming back to 2019, and so there's no way around it. The internet is everywhere. You can't listen to it. You can get it on planes. Some cities have been incorporating hotspots on the street, using old payphone booths. You can even get it underground on the subway, in your car. It's literally everywhere. But I want you to take a minute to think, if you lost your internet access, how would your life be impacted, given the ubiquity of the internet as we know it now? So think about how your life will be impacted, like positively, negatively, or whatever. So job is a big one. We work in tech. If we didn't have internet, a lot of us would not be able to work. So that's not surprising. Another one I see is isolated. And that's true for, especially if you live somewhere where maybe you don't have access to like a community that you identify with. Internet helps with, not feeling so isolated. So these are some interesting responses that I think we should take into account. So with that in mind, I want to point out that in my hometown of Detroit, 40% of Detroit residents do not have internet access at home. And that includes 70% of school-aged children. And as it turns out, Detroit is the second worst connected city in the country, over 140,000 households without fixed broadband internet. And 100,000 households have no internet at all. We are second after Brownsville, Texas. But I want to point out that Detroit does not have a monopoly of poor connectivity. It's also important to note that when we say fixed broadband internet, we are talking about wireline broadband technologies and fixed Wi-Fi technologies, and it doesn't include 3G and 4G mobile service. And so this is a graphic about the information that I just mentioned. So with 40% of households in Detroit that have no internet access of any kind, in the households that have no fixed line internet access, they rely on their smartphones to get online. And 70% of Detroit school children have no internet access at home. So if any of you have kids, just think about, how that would affect their ability to do their homework or to study. Especially if, as classrooms are using more and more technology, using tools like Google Classroom to do assignments and to take tests or share resources. And this is a graphic that illustrates all of the, I guess, worst connected cities. And this is not just something that affects rural communities, because we might think that this might be an issue that is primarily affecting more rural communities, but we have major cities like Cleveland, Ohio, Miami, Florida, and Newark, New Jersey, that all have 40% or more households without internet. So like I said, Detroit does not have a monopoly on this problem. This is a nationwide problem, and it's not isolated to rural communities or communities that lie outside of urban areas. These are actually major metropolitan areas that have this issue. And so that brings us into smartphone dependency. So as the adoption of traditional broadband services has slowed down in recent years, growing number of Americans now use smartphones as their primary means of access to internet at home. And 1 in 5 American adults are smartphone-only internet users. So this trend is important to note because it is strongly reflected in the 57% of households in Detroit that solely rely on their smartphones to access the internet. And this is from the Pew Research. They released a report in June of this year showing that 37% of Americans go online primarily using a smartphone, and they see that as a reason they use their smartphone so much that they feel like they don't need broadband internet access. And here are a couple of graphs from that same report from the Pew Research Institute. As you can see, the 18 to 29 group is the largest number of group using their smartphones to go online, with 58% using their smartphones only to go online. But overall, it's at 37%. And the research is showing that growing number of non-broadband users are citing their smartphones as a reason for not bothering to have broadband internet at home. And so I thought that that was interesting because a lot of us, we use our phone as, we're away from home, so we use our phone to go online. But people who use their phone exclusively to go online are increasingly feeling like they don't need to have broadband internet access at home. And so I want us to think about, what does this look like in everyday life for people within these demographics? So think about the tasks that you do every day on your computer, trying to do them exclusively on your phone in a mobile app or a mobile browser. So think about the overall user experience with a desktop device versus a mobile device. And think about how the devices that we have at our disposal inform both internet access and tech literacy. So I always like to point out that, having mobile devices is great, and having, access to the internet through mobile devices is great, but it's very limiting in a lot of ways, because what you can do in a mobile app or a mobile browser is limited to the scope of what that app wants you to do, or what the company that made the app wants you to do. And so, as many of you I'm sure have experienced, you might think you can do something in a mobile app, but they don't even bother to include that feature. You have to go on the website to do it. And sometimes maybe you try to do it in a mobile browser, but the UI is not great, and that kind of makes it difficult to use, or it's just not compatible at all. So also, only using mobile devices can be a limitation, because what if I always use this example with my students. We use Mozilla Thimble as an online text editor because it's free, and they have to create an account so that they can save their work. And of course, inevitably, they forget their password, and so they have to log in to reset it. But a lot of them have never logged into Gmail on a desktop computer. So I have to walk them through that process of logging into their email account on a computer because they've never done it before. So that's just one example of limitations that come into play when you have access to the internet, but it's only through a smartphone. It really hinders your ability to function in certain environments. And so I wanted to highlight this quote from Diana Nucera. She's the director of the Detroit Community Technology Project. She said, when you think of all of the ways the internet affects your lives and how 40% of people don't have that access, you can start to see how Detroit has been stuck in this economic disparity for such a long time. So I felt like that was a very powerful quote because everything is connected. So the big question after all of that very sobering data is how do we even approach solutions to the digital divide? And I will take a few minutes to talk about some of the work that I've done with various programs in Detroit. There are very grassroots programs that exist to address tech literacy and everything, filling in the gaps, basically. So here we have the Detroit Technology Community Project. Within the last couple of years, there's been a growing cohort of Detroiters that started a movement to build the internet themselves. And it's a coalition of community members and multiple Detroit nonprofits, and they call it the Equitable Internet Initiative. And I actually want to take a few minutes to show a short clip from a documentary that Vice Motherboard did on the Equitable Internet Initiative. Oh, we don't have audio, do we? Okay, well, my audio isn't working right now, so that's okay. It was just a little bit about, I'm sorry? No, it's okay. The video is in the slides, and you can also look it up on YouTube. It's on the Vice Motherboard YouTube channel. But that was a short documentary about the Equitable Internet Initiative, the digital stewardship that they started to train people to build mesh networks that were tapping into unused fiber, basically unused fiber cables that were left behind by telecoms companies, and using them to broadcast Wi-Fi signals out to households in 3 different neighborhoods so that they could have access to the internet. I know that was a very dumbed down explanation. It's much more complex than that, but I don't want to say too much and get it wrong. So, also another organization that I have been working with for 2 years as of in October is an organization called Journey, and they are an organization that is an advocate for increasing tech literacy in Detroit. So they teach workshops. I'm an instructor for them. So schools who are interested in having their students learn coding, they will hire us for us to come into their schools to teach their students to code. There are also after-school programs that we've worked with. They put on programming throughout the year. So Journey has a lot of, I will say, influence in addressing tech literacy in Detroit. And so this is a flyer for an event that is actually happening tomorrow. They do these quarterly. They're called the Youth Tech Exploration. And it's just a room full of maybe about a dozen tables. And so at one table you can learn HTML and CSS. At another table you can learn Scratch. You can learn little bits. You can learn digital Lego blocks. I'm not sure what that is. Or that might be the Lego robots. Yes. And you can also learn Python, Ruby on Rails. They even are teaching, I guess, command line and version control using GitHub. So these events happen quarterly, and they're for youth, 8 to 18, and it's free. So you can just show up. We, provide snacks, and from, for 4 hours, you can learn how to do any of these like technical things. Another program that I worked with through Journey is called Innovation Huddle, and it's a STEM and entrepreneurship program that introduced students to STEM careers and also taught them how to start businesses. So what they would do is we would use the Ford STEAM lab model and introduce them to STEAM careers, and then teach them about entrepreneurship, how to start a business, and then we would teach them how to code so that they can build websites for their businesses. And then at the end there's like a pop-up shop where people can come and we give them fake money to go to all the different shops and buy from the kids, and it's like a competition, so whoever sells the most, they get a prize. So it's a really cool program, and I have had a lot of fun working with them. And this is a picture of some of my students. We were a couple of weeks into the program, and we were teaching them how to pair program. So I don't know if the people in the back can see, this is like a couple of students sitting, and then I have a student sitting down who's driving, and then another student who's navigating, and then on the screen they have CodePen. They're using CodePen to write some basic HTML because we had just taught them HTML the week before. So that is another program that I have worked with that I'm very proud of the work that I've done, and the kids are great. So some of them are very hesitant to approach it, but once they get it, they're all of a sudden, they're kind of going beyond what we're teaching and looking things up and figuring things out for themselves. So it's really nice to see them kind of blossom into, being very skeptical of their technical abilities to, going above and beyond what we have shown them how to do. And so back to the big question. So how do we promote digital inclusion? Is it a matter of pooling resources? Are we maximizing existing policies and programs? If so, what are those policies and programs? Because, some places might not have policies and programs to address this. Are we advocating for new policies and programs? Because I believe advocacy is very important in just even starting this conversation of addressing the digital divide. And are we focusing on affordability of access to digital literacy training? And what does that look like? So the big question poses even more big questions, but I feel like this is where the conversation starts so that we can start to come up with solutions to begin addressing the digital divide, because there's not one set solution. It's going to have to be a combination of all of these things. And so how do we go about, what do we attack first? And how do we go about approaching each of these questions? So that's all I have. Thank you. And so feel free to follow me on Twitter, connect with me on LinkedIn. You can view my slides, and also I shared my resources as well if you want to look at all of the data and everything that was used in this talk. Thank you very much for coming. And